Welcome to True Stories, where real encounters are retold with chilling detail. Tonight's story takes us deep into the quiet town of Ebenridge, where the night shift at a Starbucks became far more than just coffee and routine. What began as an ordinary shift for Shane Adler turned into an unforgettable brush with something dark, unsettling, and possibly deadly. I never used to think much about my hometown. Ebenridge wasn't the kind of place where excitement ever happened. It was the sort of town where everyone knew one another's business, where rumors spread faster than the autumn wind, and the nights were so quiet you could hear your own footsteps echo down the empty streets. Growing up there, I always believed it was safe, too safe, almost. That's why, when I turned 27, I settled into a steady job at the Starbucks on Willow Lane. The store had been there for years, tucked away just past the gas station at the bend where the road slipped into the trees. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady. A warm light in the middle of long nights. Truckers, night shift workers, and the occasional restless soul passing through kept the place alive after midnight. My name's Shane Adler. For nearly 3 years, I worked the night shift behind that counter. I didn't mind the solitude. I'd put on some music in the back, read a book between customers, and sip on endless refills of coffee. It was the kind of routine that made the nights blur together, until one night broke that pattern forever. It was the first week of November, just after the clocks had turned back. The cold carried a bite that sank straight into your skin, and people came in looking for something hot to take home before shutting their doors against the dark. At around 2:30 in the morning, the door chimed. I looked up from wiping down the counter, expecting one of my regulars. But the man who walked in wasn't anyone I recognized. He was tall, with a gaunt frame that made his clothes hang awkwardly. His jacket was old and worn, his jeans a size too big, and his skin was so pale it seemed almost sickly. What unsettled me most were his eyes, sunken, intense, as if they hadn't seen rest in weeks. He didn't head for the counter. Instead, he slipped silently into the farthest booth, tucked in the shadows where the light barely reached. Slinging a beat-up duffel bag beside him, he sat perfectly still, watching. I forced myself to smile as I walked over, pad in hand. "Good evening," I said, trying to sound casual. "What can I get you?" His eyes lifted slowly, and for just a moment, they locked onto mine. The stare sent a chill through me, cold and heavy. His voice was rough, as if scraped raw from disuse. "Coffee, just one word, nothing else." I nodded and turned away quickly, eager to escape that gaze. As I poured his drink, I glanced back. He wasn't looking at the menu. His hand tapped a strange rhythm on his leg. Steady, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock. When I set the coffee in front of him, he didn't touch it. He just sat there, staring out the window into the empty parking lot, his fingers still tapping. The silence in the room thickened. My nerves screamed, but I kept wiping down the counters, pretending everything was normal. At 3 a.m., the bell above the door jingled again, and I almost sighed with relief when I saw who it was. It was Gerald, one of my oldest regulars. He'd been a trucker before retirement, and he came in almost every night for scrambled eggs, bacon, extra crispy, and his usual chat about the weather. He was rough around the edges, but his familiar presence felt grounding. "Evening, Shane," he said warmly, settling into his usual spot. "The usual, if you don't mind." I smiled, grateful for the distraction. Sherwin started his order. But out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of the stranger unzipping his bag. My heart froze. He pulled out a shirt, wrinkled and stiff, stained with a dark red that could only have been dried blood. I stared for a moment too long. He studied the shirt in his hands, his fingers twitching slightly as though he were reliving something. Then, just as quickly, he shoved it back into the bag and zipped it closed. When his eyes flicked up and caught mine, he smirked. That tiny, twisted curve of his lips made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight. "You okay over there?" Gerald asked, noticing my distraction. "Yeah," I said, forcing a laugh. "Just a weird night." But I wasn't okay. My stomach knotted tighter with every passing second. The man hadn't touched his coffee. He just sat there, still and watchful, his eyes scanning every corner of the shop like he was waiting for something or someone. A little later, he pulled out a small notebook. At first, I thought he might just be jotting down thoughts. But when I walked past, pretending to check the napkin holders, I saw the pages. Not words. Not sketches, numbers. Endless rows of numbers, some crossed out, some circled violently. At the top of the page, written in jagged letters, were 2 words. The heaviest. I nearly dropped the napkin holder right there. I hurried back behind the counter, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly plate Gerald's eggs. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to call someone, anyone, but my voice was gone. The man suddenly stood up. Without touching the coffee, without a word, he tossed a crumpled bill onto the table and slung the duffel bag over his shoulder. At the door, he paused. He turned his head slowly, meeting my eyes one last time. That same smirk stretched across his face, a look of calculation as though he'd already decided my fate. Then he stepped into the night and vanished. I didn't sleep after my shift. I couldn't. All I saw when I closed my eyes was that blood-stained shirt, those frantic numbers, that smirk. By morning, I had called the sheriff and reported everything. They promised to check the security cameras. 2 days later, the news broke. A body had been discovered in the woods not far from Willow Lane. The time of death. Between midnight and 3 a.m., the same hours that strangers sat inside the Starbucks. I quit the very next day. Some people said I was being paranoid, that he was just some drifter passing through. But I know what I saw. I know what was written in that notebook. And I will never forget the way his eyes weighed me, like I was just another number waiting to be crossed off. Since that night, Maplewood has never felt safe again. Moral of the story: evil doesn't always arrive with noise or violence. Sometimes it slips quietly into the places we feel most secure, wearing an ordinary face. Always trust the instincts that warn you, because ignoring them could cost far more than peace of mind.